In this video, we are covering what the fundraising process looks like for someone who would go through the GoCorps program. So GoCorps is an organization that helps Christian young adults tithe the first 2 years of their career in global missions. So tithing is all about, this idea of kind of sacrificing, giving your first fruits of something to the Lord. When we think about tithing, we usually think about it in a financial concept where we're giving the first 10% of our income to the church so the church can further kingdom purposes. But with GoCorps, we're really passionate about encouraging students to tithe their career, thinking about taking the first 2 years of their career and giving that to the global church to further global kingdom purposes. So GoCorps helps students find placements to use their degree overseas for 2-year positions alongside long-term teams serving long-term projects. So whatever you're studying, GoCorps coaches help you find a way to connect your major to God's global mission. And a big part of the fundraising, a big part of the GoCorps program is you will fundraise your own salary before you go. I know this is usually something super new to people. Usually they're really uncertain, have never done something like this before. So we just wanted to create some resources for you to get a little bit more familiar about what exactly that looks like. So we have a lot of people up here who have done this process themselves and have walked alongside so many young adults who have done this process as well. And so we just want to share a little bit with you guys today about some of the experiences that we've had personally, as well as how we help students who are really kind of considering doing something like this after graduation. So our first question is, what are the common responses that you tend to hear from people when they first hear about the fundraising requirement with GoCorps?
I think the initial response from most people is, I'm kind of nervous, that makes me a little hesitant, and I haven't done anything like that before. So I can't really picture what that looks like. And so something that is really helpful is just to begin understanding, what do we mean when we say fundraising, when we talk about support raising, bringing that from a really ambiguous concept down to a more understandable series of practical steps.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think a response I've heard a lot too is this idea, I've never done that before. Like, I don't even know where to begin when it comes to support raising, or, how do I start and what does that journey look like? And I think that's something that hopefully today you'll hear from us, is we want to be a part of that journey. So I think that's the first thing I often hear is like, I just don't even know how to begin. And then something I was thinking about the other day was, I feel like as I'm talking and walking with students through the process, it feels like, wow, this would be so amazing, but support raising. Like, it feels like there's this would be amazing, so cool, but I have this thing I have to tackle first, and it feels almost like a mountain. And so I think often it feels like there's this really big hurdle you have to get in order to say yes to what you're doing.
I know, like, for me, in my own personal experience, I'm just gonna be honest, it was like a huge negative thing for me. Like, I thought about the role with GoCorps and I said, this is literally my dream job, except fundraising. And it really almost kept me from doing it. Like, it was something where it almost was that last thing that would cause me to turn the other way. But I remember just really processing with the Lord about that and coming to a realization like, okay, if the only thing that's keeping me is this fear, for me, it was this fear of fundraising, this fear of money. I realized I don't want that to be the number one factor in my decision, because I don't want that to set a precedent like for the rest of my life. I was thinking about doing GoCorps right after graduation. It was one of my first jobs after college. So I really kind of had to come to terms with realizing like, okay, I want to like be able to take a stand now and for the rest of my life to say, Lord, I'm going to trust you more than this fear of fundraising. And it was really transformational for me. But I guess I would also just say, like, if you feel that way too, like, you are not alone. Like, I 100% almost walked away.
Yep.
And I'm really glad that I didn't. It was a difficult journey, but it was also a doable journey. It's so much more doable than I thought before I started. And really, I was able to just say, I'm just gonna say yes, and kind of trust God in all the next steps. But yeah, I am really glad I said yes, even though like, so yeah, if you're feeling like, I really love this is really cool, but like fundraising is the only thing keeping me, I just really encourage you to really, lay that down and ask the Lord maybe some of the same questions that I asked the Lord in that time, to be able to see if he might invite you to just take that next yes.
Yeah, I agree. I had the same reaction, and it was almost like a gut reaction. I remember like running home to my husband and opening the apartment door and saying, I just got offered my dream job, except they want me to raise my own money. And I just didn't have a concept of what that meant. I had been on a few short-term mission trips at that point, but I don't know, it just felt very different to raise support for a short-term trip that was 2 weeks than to be asked to raise that for my job, like an indefinite amount of years, 2 years, 3 years. So I had the same reaction, like this almost gut reaction to be afraid of the unknown. Like I had no idea even why I was afraid. I remember telling my husband, I don't know why, but I have this like mixture of fear and excitement that I just don't know how to release. So a lot of that journey for me looked like releasing and surrendering to the Lord, the excitement and the fears at the same time. Like learning how to hold those both together was super helpful in me saying yes to this role. And then I look back now and it's like, oh yeah, I had so much help in support raising. Like that was just something so, felt so big, but has become such a beautiful part of my journey as a staff member with GoCorps.
I think we work from this starting position of, at least for me, it was asking the question, is this even okay? Like, is this even appropriate? Do I have the okay from God, from people, to ask people to give me money? And we start from these, our starting point is typically these assumptions that we have heard from other people, our own assumptions about money, or what the Bible says about money. And so I don't think that's a bad place to start, but it's a bad place to end, if that makes sense. Like, to ask the question, is this okay, is a good place to start, as long as you are going to the scriptures and then you enter into a place of discovery. Like, what does God say about money? How does God use his church to support and to push forward his mission? And so it's, having that uncomfortable feeling at the beginning, that's not it can be a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be, as long as you take those next steps to actually enter into discovering God's heart for money, for the nations, for how he uses the church and resources. And so it's okay, but yeah, that's pretty normal to start with. What is this feeling? I don't like it.
Well, and I think our reality is that we've grown up in a culture that really values earning your wage and the hard work behind earning a paycheck. And so a response I've heard to that question is it feels like begging. And so I know in my own support raising experiences, it's been normal for me to transpose that on who I'm asking. Like, are they thinking that I'm begging? I'm often speaking to people who are older than me, who were raised in a different time period than I was. And so what are they thinking about me that I'm asking them for money? So I've often heard it feels like begging.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some specifics, because something both you, Abby, and Megan hit on was a lot of times it's just unknown. Like, what in the world does it even look like? So explain, in kind of real world terms, like, what does a fundraising process actually look like? What is someone actually signing on to do if they say yes?
Well, I would start with it's highly relational. It's placing a value on the connections and relationships that are a part of your life and that have been a part of your life through multiple stages of your life. And so to connect with those people and make an invitation to them to be a part of what God is now inviting you into is a really special thing. And so it starts with thinking through who are your networks of people that are a part of your life, being able to catch them up on what your college experience has been, what you are now being invited into and pursuing, to get to know how to share that story in a way that reflects well what the Lord has been doing in your life, and then communicates that in a way that's compelling to the people you know, and being able to arrange times to sit down and talk with them and share that vision, share your story, communicate to them the needs that you have, both prayerfully and financially, for the commitment you are making, whether it is 2 years or something longer or something shorter. And so to be able to make that ask to them to say, would you consider praying with me, joining me prayerfully? Would you consider joining me financially, and asking the Lord how he may desire for you to be involved in this opportunity, and then to follow up and to care well for the relationship by honoring that ask and honoring your friend to see how has the Lord prompted them, and how would they desire to be involved in the work you're going to be doing?
Yeah, I think something that really changed like my perspective of support raising might have been something you said like when I first started with GoCorps. I don't even remember where I first heard it, but it's something that I talk about with all the candidates that I coach now. And it's this idea, kind of what Megan was hitting on, of partnership, and this idea that as we make the financial ask and as we invite people into this journey with us, we are also inviting them into the work the Lord is doing all across the world. And so we're actually inviting them to play a role in the work that the Lord is doing in whatever country you're serving in whatever role you're doing. And that totally changed my perspective. Like, I'm not just making a financial ask, asking people to join me with money, but I'm actually giving them the opportunity to be a part of what the Lord is doing. Because for many reasons, maybe they can't be the goer. And so, I think about my grandparents. They're a little bit older, and they just, like, health-wise couldn't go right now. But by inviting them to be part of my team as I work and serve with GoCorps, man, now they get to be part of what the Lord is doing with all the students I coach. And that work and that ask is then multiplied. And so for me, it's this idea of partnership that feels very foundational. And then something I love about the GoCorps model is this word that I also like to share is just accountability. Like, you have so much accountability in the process. So many people coming alongside you, rallying around you. You're never walking through it alone. You don't have to figure things out alone. But man, the resources and the people and the coaches that you have, like, logistically coming alongside you to brainstorm and to think about what you're doing and maybe how it's not working, or man, what you're doing is working and it's doing so good. So that accountability, I just think, is so helpful in the process. So also thinking logistically, like, am I gonna have help? Do I have to do this alone? No, like, the point is that you have people rallying around you from day one of support raising. And then I think that shifts into having your team. So you're not going alone, you're support raising with a team, and then you're going with a team.
Something that I learned pretty early on, and it was kind of shocking, awesome, and terrifying at the same time, was I would schedule these like 30-minute meetings for my, partnership meeting, and they would turn into like 3-hour meetings. And I was like, wait, I can't just schedule 30 minutes for these meetings, because what I learned was people who love the Lord love to talk about the Lord. We just aren't very good at initiating those conversations in normal day-to-day life. And when I found that fundraising gave access to was conversations about what the Lord is doing and what we as His people desire for Him to do. Those conversations that we just don't normally have on a day-to-day basis. And so, practically for me, it was kind of shocking to see, people want to talk about these things. People want to talk about what God is doing around the world, what God is doing in your life and in my life. And making this ask to join and partner with me and really with what God is doing almost like reignited these old friendships that I had that, had 5-10 years ago. And now we have a reason to talk about what God is doing and how both of us can be involved in what God is doing. It unleashed this whole new reality for, I think, what we're meant to be as believers, which we're talking about the Lord and what He's doing is supposed to be normal and natural, giving of our resources, being generous with a God who's been generous with us in grace. Like, that's supposed to be normal. And it unlocked this new part of me and who God had called me to be. And I think even them, that I think the church misses a lot of the time. So
I think it's important to remember, you don't have to do it alone. So GoCorps has a week of training that's literally designed to take someone who's done absolutely zero fundraising before. Within 1 week of in-person training, you'll go from never having fundraised before to really feeling confident. People leave our trainings every year saying they feel really confident. You actually come away with an 80-page manual. We even give you exact scripts. Put this in a text message. So we've been around for 15 years. We've sent over 300 goers. And we're so focused. The only people we send overseas is recent grads going overseas for 2 years. So we have a very targeted training that's really going to help give you what you need and very practical next steps. I know for me, I'm like a numbers person. I have spreadsheets all the time. That just helps my brain think, when I can put something a little bit more concrete and less abstract. And fundraising can feel really abstract if you've never done it. So if numbers are really helpful for you, what we've really found is that it usually takes about 30 different people, 30 different individuals or churches who are saying yes to partnership and saying, yes, I can give a monthly amount. So what that feels just so much more doable to me. You really want to just sit down and think like, do I know 30 people that I think would really at least be interested in hearing about what God is doing around the world through this team that I get to join and get to serve alongside with my skill sets for the next couple years. So, and what I really like about GoCorps is it's monthly partnerships. So when you think about what does it mean to raise money to do something for 2 years, you probably have this gigantic number in your mind. But the way GoCorps does it is by people who are committing to giving a monthly amount. So these are small amounts. The average gift that people are giving is $80 a month. So you just need 30 people giving an average of $80 a month. Some will give $10 a month, some will give 20, some might be able to give 100 or 200, but it will average out to about 30 people giving $80 a month. And that covers everything that you need for the 2 years. That covers all of your language learning, all of your housing, your groceries, it covers health insurance, it covers your student loan payments, it covers everything that you need to like live and thrive overseas. And I feel like if someone would have just helped me know like it takes 30 people in your life, then that probably would have given me a little bit less of that like fear of the unknown. And that's something I would encourage you to do. If you're really sitting there and thinking like, is this something that I think is doable for me? Then I would say take about 5 minutes and just pray. Just ask the Lord, kind of like what Megan said, ask the Lord, who are the people you've put around me? Who are people I grew up with? Who are my family members? Who are people in my church? You know, think about a hometown church or a college church. For you, you might have two, or that might be the same. You know, think about professors. Think about people that you've gone on short-term mission trips with or served in an internship with. And so pray, ask the Lord, you know, bring to mind like who you've really put around me. And then after you pray for 5 minutes, then sit down, put a little timer on your phone and give yourself 20 minutes. And within 20 minutes, write down as many names as you can. And if you can get to about 50 names, then honestly, you probably have what it takes to be able to raise the funds. It might be a little hard. You might think of 10 and then you have to stop, but if you keep going. So that's an exercise I might encourage you to do. And then once you kind of see those names and you've prayed over them and the Lord has brought those names to you, it can give you a little bit more peace when it feels a little bit, you know, less like unknown at that stage, when you have some more concrete things that you can really consider and bring to the Lord.
Yeah, Katie, so I think like to your point, going back to the idea of accountability in the support raising process, if you're like trying to make that list and you're like, I have like 15 names and I don't know where to go from there. The beauty of working with GoCorps is that you get a coach, and our job as coaches are to walk alongside you in the entire journey. And part of that is getting on a Zoom call or a phone call and saying, okay, you're at 15 names. Let's brainstorm together where we can get more names from, like who else in your life. And so that's just something for me that I found really helpful when I was support raising, because I remember sitting down and writing down names. And I don't remember how many I got to, but it wasn't enough. And it felt really overwhelming. Like, this isn't enough people. How am I going to do this? And I talked to my coach and another coworker, and we were able together to brainstorm, you know, what about this person and this person? And so if you're sitting there and you're looking at your list and you're feeling overwhelmed and you have a coach, like, we want to work with you. It's probably one of us. And if you don't have a coach yet, and maybe you're new to the process, again, that's our job within GoCorps, to come alongside you in this journey and to help you really figure out how to like uncover how you can support raise.
Another thing I'd also just add, like what exactly does fundraising look like, is what you're doing in the day-to-day. You know, what does it look like actually day to day while you're doing 3 months of fundraising before you go? And really what you're shooting for is to have different face-to-face meetings with people, whether that means you get to get coffee with them, meet with them after church, or you meet with them on Zoom if they don't live near you. And you're really just sitting down and getting to just talk about your team. You're getting to talk about your story, why you feel like you are saying yes to kind of tithing your career and giving these first years after college to use your business degree or your nursing degree or your social work degree with a ministry overseas. And you just get to talk about that. It's actually, they were like way less scary than I thought. You're just getting to share about what God's doing in your life, and then you get to invite people to consider giving. It's not anything where we're coercing them. Like going back to earlier Ryan's point, it could feel like you're begging, but really the way that GoCorps model is and that we'll train you in is basically getting to just make people aware of the need and say, if this is something you feel like you want to get on board with and you have room in your budget, I would love to invite you to come alongside. If you don't have room in your budget to give, you can keep up with me through praying for me, and I'll share prayer requests. Or you might be able to connect me to others. Maybe you can introduce me to your small group, and someone in your small group would be able to give. So I actually found that when I was actually sitting down to do the real fundraising, it was just sending a quick text message, getting coffee with someone, sharing about the things I love, and then it was way less scary. And I was able to kind of be able to not as much feel like begging or all those fears that I had. It felt a lot more natural after I received the GoCorps training and after I was able to kind of like understand it from a biblical mindset.
I think a big shift for me when I thought about the practical day-to-day, because at first it was really hard to make a phone call. Like I would look at my list and I would just go, I have to call these people and like ask for money or whatever. And so but a shift happened for me just praying and talking to my coach. It's not thinking about it as I'm taking something from them, but I'm actually inviting them to do something with me. Like, who doesn't like being invited to something? You know, like we actually are offended when we are left out. And so when I had that shift in my brain of, oh, I'm not taking something from them, I'm actually inviting them like into this with me. And then it actually became more exciting to me. Like I got more excited talking about it. I got more excited when I would look at my list instead of like, oh, this is a burden on my back. Like, no, like I actually don't want anybody to be left out of what God is doing. And if they say no, they say no. That's okay. Like that is absolutely okay. But for the people who said yes, they had so much joy when they partnered with me. And that was humbling and exciting.
I think similar to that, something that really helped me was thinking about it from the perspective of if I don't ask, I'm saying no for them. Yeah. And that leaves them out, but it eliminates an opportunity for them. And so to not say no for them, but to at least engage in the conversation and get to let them be the ones to ask the Lord and say yes or no based on their situation and how they're being led.
Well, I remember being at GoCorps training for fundraising, getting to that assignment of writing these lists of names, and I struggled to come up with 50 because I was saying no for people. I would think of someone, and then I would start thinking, well, I know this about them, I know that about them, so they're probably not a good person to ask. And so I remember hearing, though, at that training, like, we cannot say no for people. Like, you never know what work the Holy Spirit is doing in that person that might lead them to partner with you.
I remember this one lady at the church I was attending. I had been asking people in the church for meetings, and so, you know, that starts to spread. Oh, Colton's doing this. And this one lady came up to me and she said, hey, I heard you're doing this. You haven't asked me yet. And in my mind, I was thinking, you're like the poorest person I know. Like, of course I'm not going to ask you. And then she initiated the meeting for me, and then she ended up giving X amount of dollars out of what I knew that she didn't really have. And to this day, she's still on our support team. You just never know what God is doing in someone's heart. And like you said, if you don't ask, then you're saying no for them.
Well, we kind of have hit on this a little bit already, but I know that this is just such a common way for people to feel. So I wanted to just share a little bit more, maybe, if there's anything else that comes to your mind. Do you feel like it's unwise or maybe even shameful to like live off of a fundraised salary, especially right after you spend all these years and all this money getting a college degree? What was that like for you? Or what would you say to someone to maybe encourage them if they feel like it's really shameful or unwise to step into a fundraising position after college?
I have kind of a snarky remark. I don't know.
Go for it.
But I mean, do you think that Jesus was ashamed to live off the finances that the women provided for him in Luke? Do you think that Paul was ashamed? Do you think the Levites were ashamed in the Old Testament? I mean, I think that fear is honestly an unbiblical fear. And, you know, instead of entering into this, okay, I'm going to start from what I know about Scripture or what Scripture says, instead of my assumptions. And I think that's a beautiful thing for the church to gather around people, you know, like in Acts 13, where it says the Spirit set apart, you know, Paul to go out. And so I think the Spirit does call people, and then he calls the people of God to say, go, we're with you, we're behind you, we're a part of this. And I think that's a beautiful picture. And so,
Well, I think within that feeling of shame lies this idea that the work that I'm doing is lesser than, like if I'm a nurse at a hospital or I have a job at a business, that my work in ministry is less than, and that just simply isn't true. And 1 Timothy, it talks about the worker is worth the wages. And so the work that you would be saying yes to doing by tithing your career is worth that wage. It is worth every penny of that wage. So
I think too, I totally hear that concern and just want to say you're not alone if that's a concern you are feeling or if that's something you're wrestling with, because I think as a coach for many years at the GoCorps, it's something I hear all the time. And so know that you're not the only one probably wrestling with that. I think that something I've really come to and have discovered with students that I've worked with is how are we defining success? Is it really biblical success that we are marking things by, or have we allowed the world to enter into our definition of success? And so as you're defining success post-graduation, what does that look like for you? I would encourage you to write out success on a piece of paper and then define to yourself, what would being successful after college look like? And then to really look at that definition you've written and to discern, is that biblical? If not, what am I missing? And if it is, man, where does that lead to? And obedience and looking at what the Lord would call successful with this degree, with this new skill set that you have post-grad, where is he asking you to go? And I think for myself, when I redefined success in a biblical way where I saw Jesus in that, it totally shifted how I could use my own college degree, how I talk with students about this awesome degree they have with skills and just these things that are so needed all around the world. So I would really encourage you, what does it look like to biblically be successful after college?
I think about the story in Philippians 2 where it talks about how Paul was in prison in Rome, and the church in Philippi raised up funds, food, resources for Paul, and Epaphroditus from the church in Philippi almost gave his life to get these resources to Paul, this support to Paul. And so I just think about those feelings that we have to fight of, like you're talking about with shame and the reality of living on support. There were people in the church that were willing to give their lives to get this support to Paul. I just think it's a really cool picture that, to me, it gives me comfort. Okay, if God is moving me forward to do this, then he's going to provide not finances, but people to make that happen, who are willing to lay down their lives to see the gospel go out. And that's humbling.
I'll answer this question maybe in two parts. It's really helpful to be thinking about, how am I stewarding this degree that I have? So probably a lot of people have actually invested in you so that you can get this degree. Family who has helped cover some expenses for you maybe, and you've worked so hard for this degree. So it is really helpful to be thinking about, okay, am I stewarding this well? Am I using my finances wisely? But one thing I would encourage you to think about is this season of life is so unique. When you're fresh out of college, in your 20s, you're probably not paying a mortgage payment yet at that time in your life. You're probably not providing for a family and raising children. There's just something so unique about those first few years after college, where you have less tying you down and you have less other responsibilities and less other people depending on you. So this is a really great time. If there was any time in your life to kind of do something like this specific season is a good time to do it. And GoCorps, we have built the program to help you take care of your financial responsibilities. So if you have student loans when you graduate, your student loan payments are a part of the fundraising process that you're doing. You're actually getting to make your student loan payments through the GoCorps process. We will make sure that you raise support successfully so that it covers all of your needs overseas. You actually also have a little bit of retirement and savings built into what you're receiving while you're serving for 2 years. So it is definitely a sacrifice to be able to say yes to something like this versus a job where you would be able to maybe raise or save a little bit more in those 2 years. But we want to also make sure that it is a financially healthy place for you to step into, and it's a really unique season to take advantage. So I personally think it is kind of wise to say, I'm thinking about everything else around me and what my other responsibilities are, and this is the time in life where I'm tied down by less. So this is when I'm going to be able to tithe, to be able to, if you're ever going to give 2 years, to a ministry, then these are really good 2 years to do it. And I think sometimes too, when we feel shame associated with this, for me, I think it's because I thought about it was like, I am asking this person to give me money. I felt like the money was coming to me. That's not really what the process looks like. And when you think about what the process really looks like, it's really similar to the way money is exchanged in jobs and so many other aspects of our culture, but we feel like we're the ones that are doing it super differently. So really what you are doing when you're raising funds is people are giving money to the ministry so that ministry can cover your salary for the 2 years. So when you meet with people, you're going to share about, for example, an opportunity to get to provide life-saving medical care to isolated islands. And you're inviting them to give to that ministry so the ministry has the funds to be able to pay you your salary to live and serve for those 2 years. So it's really similar. Like if we think about like how does a teacher get a paycheck? They get their paycheck from the school. How does the school get the funds for their paycheck? They get it from the government. Money is always flowing through people and through organizations. That's if you're a nurse and you get your salary from a hospital, how does the hospital get that? From patients who are paying. But for you to be able to invest your nursing skill into those who can't pay, you get to work with hospitals and clinics that are not charging people for their medical care. So people who would never have access to medical care now can have life-saving medical access. And so you have donors who give to the ministry so that it can cover your living expenses because the people who come to the hospital aren't able to pay, so there's not a profit there. Or we think about like pastors and churches. Many churches, unless the pastor's bivocational, people give to the church and then the church gives to the pastor so that the pastor can full-time do the work of discipleship and ministry and sharing the gospel and walking with people through some of their most trying times. It's really similar. People in your life will give to the ministry so that ministry can give you the funds you need to live and serve. And when I thought about it that way, I realized the people that I'm inviting, it's not just like a handout, they're giving me money, and that's where I kind of felt some of that shame, that handout. But to see it like, no, I really believe in the work that God is doing through GoCorps, and I really want to use my skills alongside people who might never have access to that if it was tied to this profit. So I'm inviting people to give to the ministry so that I can then work for the ministry. But you're getting a full-time job with the ministry. You're receiving from the ministry, just like it's just the source of those funds are coming through donors and coming through this really unique opportunity where we get to connect our own people to be the donors. We get to connect our local community to our global community. And I think that kind of just seeing that differently, I think was really helpful for me.
I think something too, as you were talking, like to speak to some of your points, is thinking like how strategic it really is to use your degree within the GoCorps program. Like as you're considering, I've studied, I've spent all this money, and I have this degree. Like, man, it is so strategic in the season of life you find yourself in to do something like GoCorps. I think in 2 ways, personally and professionally, there's so much room for growth and to, just like really find maybe your niche or what the Lord has for you. So I think personally what I've seen with goers on the field that have come back is just the spiritual growth. I have a best friend, it's my husband's best friend from college, and he actually went through GoCorps right after college, and after his 2 years, he came home like just this completely different guy. He was awesome before, but man, the fire we saw in him for others to know Jesus, the fire in him to want to know Jesus more was something remarkable that I think was so marked by his 2 years. So like personally, I've seen in this friend just this growth spiritually and this growth in confidence to be really bold in your conversations about the gospel, to be really bold in how you live, to be bold in learning a language. Like he didn't know the language that he was going to learn, had never really spoken this language. I think he'd heard it before. And then the boldness, he's now fluent in that language. And so I think personally, there's so much strategy behind GoCorps for you to grow. And then professionally, really thinking about that degree, the ways that you get to grow and really explore your major and your profession within a place where you will have mentors to guide you. You kind of have like these people that take you under their wing and really help you discern, okay, I'm out of college, I have this degree and I'm doing this job, but what does that actually look like tangibly to take a degree and then put that hand in hand on the field. And we've heard so many stories of goers coming back and the strategy they've shared about, well, now I'm applying for grad school, and because I have this 2-year international experience where I've learned a language and lived alone, like it just highlights things on their resume. As they apply for jobs when they come back, just the fact that they can talk about their 2 years feels very strategic. And it's something I wouldn't have thought about until having conversations with our goers that have come back, but the 2 years not only helps them in those 2 years professionally learn and grow and explore, but I also have seen the fruit of those 2 years as they've come back and as the Lord has put them in different places in different seasons, and how that strategy has followed into their career back in the States or as they apply to grad school. So I think also like there is just so much strategy behind getting to go for 2 years and serve in a different culture.
You touched on this, Katie, but for me, student loans was probably the biggest area where I felt that piece of, is it shameful, is it unwise for me to live on support when this is such a large portion of my budget that people are covering for me to serve? And so rethinking some of that, but also to recognize that is an aspect of my living expenses that exists whether I am paid through a secular business or working in a support-raised ministry position. And so that reality doesn't change regardless. It's just something that is a part of my budget and expenses and will need to be included no matter which direction I choose. And so acknowledging that reality wouldn't change, and then to see that it was an investment in the skill set that I now possess. And so to see it as that, not that I've just accrued all of this debt unwisely, but that it was invested in what I now bring into my career, and so to be grateful for it rather than see it as this like ball and chain I carry into the next season. And the other thing is fundraising for me, I still would look back now and say it consistently has been a season of tremendous growth in faith for me. And so to pose that question of, is it unwise to put yourself in a position where you have to exercise faith? No, like that would seem so foolish to even ask. So to acknowledge that there is wisdom in putting yourself in a position to get to exercise faith and trust in the Lord. And so there's such goodness in that.
I think even on like a really practical investment side of things too, it is a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice to say I'm going to spend 2 years after college in this ministry with GoCorps versus what you could do as kind of a traditional career path. But it's also only 2 years. And as you think about what you might be sacrificing and giving up, you might be sacrificing and giving up a little bit of a bigger savings account, or maybe 2 years of putting into a retirement fund. But as I think about the eternal investment, those things are passing away. Those things are here on earth, and our life on earth is so fleeting. But the investment you're making by giving 2 years of your career into God's global kingdom and into kingdom-minded projects and gospel-centered projects, that is eternal. So to look at the 2 years worth of, getting a little bit farther ahead on my student loans, maybe in these 2 years, that pales in comparison. It's a real sacrifice to be able to sacrifice some of those financial things. But also when we think about it and this is passing away and this is eternal, then that's also another way to see that investment and be willing to make that sacrifice to tithe your career when you're able to look at the worthiness of the things that you're sacrificing. Let's move on to another question here. What if you have had absolutely zero experience raising money before? Is GoCorps still right for you?
I would say if that's you, you're in the same position as 98% of the rest of people who say yes to GoCorps. So you're not alone in considering that question. And I think that's where we've referenced some of the resources and training that GoCorps provides that equips you to be prepared and to be able to fundraise your money well.
Yeah, and I would say like it's not a red flag or like a mark against you on your like application or as you're talking with a coach. If you haven't support raised, I think I get that question a lot. Like, is this a negative in my boxes? No, like we love that. We love again that we can come alongside you in the process and in that journey, whether you've support raised for 5 short-term trips or you've never support raised for a trip at all. I think that the way the GoCorps model is set up for both people, like both groups of people, whether you've done it before or not, and both sets of people can come in and be really successful. So I would say no, like this is okay. That's a good thing. We want to come alongside you in that journey.
Yeah, your 2 starting questions should be, do I love the Lord? Do I know another human being? And can I have a conversation with that human being? So if you can, we can help you with everything else.
We've literally built the fundraising training expecting you're coming in with 0 experience.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. This question we get all the time. It's a really big reality in this process. How can I help address my parents' concerns about fundraising? Maybe you are not the one with concerns, but maybe your parents. You bring this up to them and they have extreme concerns about fundraising. How can we help people address their parents' concerns?
I know for me, when I told my parents that I was considering going 2 years with GoCorps right after graduation, me raising support was their biggest concern. And so I approached that with a lot of prayer, which feels like the Jesus answer, right? But every appointment that I set up, every letter that I mailed out, every phone call that I made, I just let my parents know, like, hey, I'm making these phone calls today, I'm meeting with these people today, will you pray with me? And just invited them into the whole process. Because they were skeptical that God would provide. They personally had never known anyone that had raised support. And so God just showed me that they too need to just be brought along so that they can understand. And to this day, my dad would tell you, me going through that process has increased his own faith and that he will never question God again in regards to finances, because he was just utterly blown away at how God provided for me to go serve in Thailand for 2 years.
Ryan, that's so good. I would just add and extend to that and say, when you're in your undergrad, before you go, bring them into the conversations that you're having with the Lord early and often. I would say many times when a parent does not support their child going overseas or doing fundraising or whatever, it's because that's the first time that parent is thinking about it when you bring it up to them. And of course they're gonna be like, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Like, you've hidden this part of you that you're discovering and you're talking about with your friends or people in your church, but you're not talking about it with your parents. And so how else would you expect them to respond? And so even when you discover who GoCorps is and when you begin to look at the teams and you have a conversation with a friend or a church leader, tell your parents about it. They may be uncomfortable with it at that point, but bring them with you on that journey and just ask the Lord to grow their faith. You don't want it to be a surprise to them when you've already made the decision, but bring them on that journey with you. And they still may push back here or there, but honor the Lord with your parents, and then give them the opportunity, or rather give God the opportunity to work in them and through them.
Yeah, I think that's something I've seen in some of my goers' lives that I've walked with parents that for various reasons are just unsupportive, or it feels like there's friction in the relationship when this idea of serving and then having support is brought up. And I think something that I have found really encouraging just to observe in my last few years as a coach is, as you walk in obedience to where the Lord is calling you, He is moving in your parents' lives. And so I've seen so many goers who continue to walk in obedience where the Lord calls them, sometimes without approval or like encouragement at different levels from their parents. But then as they've walked in obedience and really walked with the Lord in this process, to hear Him and to follow in step with where he's leading, I've seen parents' hearts shift, kind of like you were saying, like as you walk in obedience, I think the Lord is really sweet to then bring your parents into that. And there's so many stories of goers. I think about one girl where like her parents were so unsupportive, and by the end of it, they were like the most supportive people, giving her what she needed, loving on her, setting up different dinners for her, and just she saw this transformation in their own lives. And I think what a missed opportunity that could have been for her parents' lives if she wouldn't have walked in obedience. So I think it's really cool to think about the relationship of child to parent and how as a child, your obedience can directly impact your parents and maybe their walk and maybe their obedience to the Lord too. So I've just found that really encouraging. Like as goers have walked in obedience, whether they've ended up going or not, just the fact that they've entertained this idea and it's been an option on the table, like to see the Lord work then in their parents' lives has been so cool. And just such a reminder that like our obedience to the Lord is seen. Our obedience to the Lord is recognized by those around us. So like, how awesome to know that just as you're trying to be in tune with the Lord, that people are watching that, including your parents.
I think also as it relates to having conversations with your parents, it's really helpful to be open to hearing their concerns and to honor their concerns. So give them the honor of asking deeper questions. So can you tell me more about your concern? Maybe their concern is they're afraid that you're not going to have what you need. So then you can share with them about, well, the way that the GoCorps process works is it covers all of my needs while I'm overseas, my student loans, my health insurance, everything. I have everything that I need. Maybe their concern is with the safety. Well, then you get to invite them into what the Lord is teaching you. Maybe their concern is like they feel that it's begging. And you get to invite them into how you have been shifting your own perspective and viewpoint in that. So honor their concerns and also recognize that many of your parents, they feel their main job in life is to keep you safe and secure. So it's okay for them to bristle at this idea at first and give them the honor to say like, I hear your concerns. I've asked these same questions and here's where I've landed on these answers. Invite them into the questions you're asking to your GoCorps coach and the things we're sharing with you that you can share with them. We actually have a page on the GoCorps website for parents. There's a video, there's a lot of frequently asked questions specifically for parents. So you can invite them there and you guys can have a conversation together by using that web page to kind of help you come to some of these conversations. And know that it might be multiple conversations. So it's okay if the first, second, even third are really difficult, hard conversations. But be able to honor them by saying, I'm hearing your concern, I'm listening to those concerns, I will pray about those concerns. Thank you for helping me think of these things. And then continue the conversation. And then I think that will just help, it might help as you're engaging with your parents.
I was gonna say, I actually had an older, I would say more wiser mom friend talk about this because I'm a new mom and I'm like, yeah, if he wants to go, let's go. Like, where do you want to go, buddy? And often that question that I've wrestled with my goers, I'm like, come on, parents, like get on board. And I just have very little experience as a parent, and so I'm learning and growing in that. But something that I heard this older mom friend say, she actually has college-age kids that are deciding if they're going to go overseas or not. And so she's like in the thick of it. And to hear her perspective shifted my perspective as a mom, but also as a coach. And she said something similar to what you were saying is we like raise our kids to be obedient to the Lord. We raise them to go, kind of like an arrow. Like they're being pulled back, they're being pulled out to be launched into the world wherever the Lord calls them. But the idea of that and then actually putting that tangibly into motion is very different as a parent. So like, as a parent, you want your kids to be launched to where the Lord calls, but then actually releasing them to go, two different ball games. And so, I don't know, that perspective and seeing that image, I see that for your parents. Like they're releasing you, they're getting ready for you to go. They're so excited, they're nervous, all the things a parent feels, but then actually letting go of the arrow is different. And so, I don't know, something about that picture gives me a lot more grace and a lot more patience in conversations to really understand where parents might be coming from as they wrestle, as they bristle, as there's friction in the conversation. So I don't know if that picture helps you, but imagine yourself as the arrow. Your parents are getting ready to release you, but in the release, there might be a struggle. There might be just some friction into letting go of that arrow. So I just appreciated this picture of this mom friend that was like actually wrestling and going through this, and she is so wise and loves the Lord, but even herself was dealing with, you know, the let go and the release. Like, how do I do this in a way that honors the Lord and my kids at the same time? So just something I love.
You have to remember your parents have seen you as a crying, poopy baby. And they've watched you do some of the dumbest things ever. And now you're asking them to support you to move overseas. It's going to take a minute, and that's okay. Let them wrestle. Don't be discouraged by that. Let them wrestle, and you trust the Lord. Be honest and be upfront, and pray for them, and just ask God to work. But it's okay for them to struggle. Give them that grace.
I think a good exercise for you to do personally as well in these conversations is think about what are things I can express gratitude for them. So in these conversations, how could you come to these conversations and express gratitude? You know, thank you for raising me with a passion for others who are hurting. Thank you for raising me with good financial sense, you know. Thank you for loving me so much that it's going to be difficult for you to let me go. You know, thank you for being willing for you to make that sacrifice. Not only is it a sacrifice for you to go overseas, it's a sacrifice for your parents to also not see you over 2 years. You know, so also think through what are ways that I can express gratitude as you're in these conversations, and that's going to open up the dialogue more as well.
I think I have struggled thinking it could be a one and done conversation. And so I'm encouraged to remember even now what you said, that it will take multiple conversations. And for my parents, one of the biggest concerns was that financial stability, because they had a particular picture in mind of what it looked like to be secure financially or to have what I would need. And so being able to let them in on some of the details of what I would have covered through the funds that would pay my salary, but also to not be discouraged when they raised a new concern, or when it seemed like they got it and then the next week or month or year they were asking the same question again. And so to just remember, like, that's how I can be too. We're forgetful as human beings, and so to have that grace for them and to expect that it won't just be a one and done conversation, but it will be an ongoing dialogue of how you're journeying together and how you're trusting the Lord together.
I think the final thing I would share here also is if you do come to a place, and many goers do experience this, where they cannot reconcile, but they feel that God is asking them to say yes even without the support of their parents, that it's important to then find someone else in your life to be kind of like a spiritual parent for you. So to say, like, okay, Lord, you never reconciled this with my parents. My parents are not on board, but I feel like you're asking me to take that step anyway. To then pray to the Lord and ask, can you put someone in my life, or can you show me who else in my life that is encouraging and supportive of this? And that those people, maybe it's through your church, maybe it's a professor, maybe it's someone you've known through some of your experience you've been a part of in college, to really ask them to be a support and an encouragement to you in that season. And that might be your story, and goers go through the process every year with that story. And it's difficult, it's hard, but we want to walk alongside you in that as well.
I was actually thinking of that for like the goers that maybe have parents that aren't even believers, like how big of a thing this feels when they're coming from a place of maybe no faith or lack of faith, or like that conversation might feel very different, and it may lead to a place of them never quite getting your motive or quite matching, I don't know, maybe your heart behind the reasons you would say yes. And I've seen with goers how finding a mentor or someone in their life that maybe isn't a parent but could step in as that role really be helpful in the conversations they're having with their parents, and then to also just have someone that is encouraging you biblically. So I don't know if you find yourself in that place too, but if you're coming from a place where maybe your parents just don't have a faith, or you feel like it's non-existent, finding a person to come alongside you that is going to keep you biblically sound and help you really be in tune with the Lord, I think could be very helpful and really strategic in your journey.
So my next question for you guys is, what are some of the blessings or the benefits that you've seen towards fundraising?
Money. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
I think Megan hit on this quite a bit, but I think a benefit that I don't know if I was expecting necessarily, which is so funny, but like my own spiritual walk has grown in ways that without support raising, I'm just not sure I would have tangibly seen. So just like my dependency on the Lord and my trust in Him, and even the ways that I see Him, like it has helped me to keep the Lord outside of the box that I often want to put Him in. So I think one of the biggest like blessings and things that I've seen in my own life from support raising, that again, I don't know why I didn't expect this. Like, why wouldn't you? You're walking with the Lord, you're trusting Him for finances, was just the growth in my own spiritual walk. And I think I'm going on year 7 or 8 of being support raised, and every year learning something different from that, and every month being dependent on Him for my financial success, for my salary, has just been so huge in my walk with the Lord, and I would say in my family's walk with the Lord, to really be dependent on the Lord for something as tangible as money. Like, you can actually count it, you can actually see it come in or not come in. So I think for me, like, one of the biggest just positives to support raising has been how I've seen personal spiritual growth throughout this season.
I think we can all look back on our lives, and we have these seasons where that season shaped the next 10, 15, 20 years of our lives. You know, for you right now, if you're undergrad, maybe it's a camp you went to in high school, or a relationship you had, or a team that you were on, or a class you were in. But as you get older and older, those seasons come more often, and support raising is one of those seasons where you learn how to depend on the Lord. I mean, you're not going to survive if you don't. And it's such a sweet and almost scary place to be, that it shakes off all the things that you were holding on to that maybe you shouldn't have been holding on to, about yourself, about money, about the world. And you're putting on all these truths about God that you've heard in Scripture, or you've heard someone teaching them, but now you're actually tasting them. I know that's what it was like for me. It was like, oh, this is what it means to depend on the Lord, or to wait on the Lord, or to trust in the Lord. And these concepts that we think about or we hear, we actually get to feel them. And that's a humbling place to be. It can be scary, but it shapes the years to come. At least in my life, it has.
I think one of the biggest blessings to support raising is what an opportunity to mobilize others. We've talked a lot about how we're inviting relationally people to partner with you. And a big part of that is allowing them an opportunity to learn more about what God's doing in the world outside of their home or their neighborhood or their city, and just thinking about and praying into what God might do through their partnership with you and how that might mobilize them, or just the cool opportunity they have to pray for you, pray for the nation that you're in, for the people you're meeting, the stories you're sharing. All of those things prayerfully are igniting within them their own desire to go or to support other missionaries or whatever. It's just a really cool opportunity to mobilize others for the Great Commission.
Very practically, I'm connected with more people today than I would have been without support raising. Coming out of college, some of the relationships that I know would have maybe fallen by the wayside, or we would have been loosely connected but not really involved in one another's lives, support raising gives that opportunity to keep connected with people, and I'm super grateful for that. I think too, nope, I've lost the other thought entirely. Shoot, what was it? There was a two, but just come back to me about it.
One thing I can think about as well is even just some of the like tangible skill sets that fundraising has given me. You know, like honestly, like resume building, like it helped me learn how to be a good communicator. It helped me learn how to cast vision. It helped me learn how to network with lots of different people and rally them to come alongside me. So especially in a secular world, having fundraising experience is really lucrative to a lot of employers out there because of those skill sets that you're gaining. And I found that also having gone through 3 months of fundraising before I started working for GoCorps, it also made me more confident in my role because I was talking about my role and praying about my role for 3 months before I went. It like the Lord used fundraising to already like start turning my heart towards what He would have me step into. And so many other people were praying for me as well. So by the time I actually began my role with GoCorps, I and so many others for months had been praying towards that role. And it really, I think, made a difference when I started. That was your number
Way
two?
better than I would have, so it's perfect.
What are some truths from Scripture that you felt like were very encouraging to you as you thought about saying yes to a role that includes fundraising? I know one for me that comes to the top of my head is the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. One of my absolute favorite parables. It's really short, but if you're not familiar, it's the kingdom of God is like a man who finds this treasure in this field. He buries it. Then he goes and sells everything he has to buy that field. And it never really stuck out to me that much until I was in a season of fundraising, but that he buried it. So if you are this guy's friends and family, what you're seeing is this guy is selling everything he owns for an empty field because you don't know about the treasure. But he knows about the treasure. And so it gave me some comfort and some confidence when there were other people in my life who were taking very different career paths and they kind of thought I was crazy. You know, well, they're gonna think that because all they're seeing is the empty field. But I am seeing the treasure and I know the treasure. And it was really like focusing more on that treasure that also helped carry me through fundraising, you know, and for me, that treasure is Jesus, you know, the old hymn, turn your eyes upon Jesus, you know, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in His wonderful face, then the things of earth will grow dim in the light of His glory and grace. So as you focus on that treasure, everything else will grow dim. And as you really, think about that treasure, then selling everything else, you know, making some crazy decisions, doing something that is definitely the norm from other people in your life, it is the only thing that makes sense at that point.
I think about the story of the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus gets off a boat. This huge crowd is following him. They end up in a field. It's a desolate place. There's thousands and thousands of people there. And Jesus is teaching for a while, and after a long period of time, the disciples come to Jesus, and they say, hey, they're getting hungry. We should send them away into the surrounding villages so that they can get themselves something to eat. It sounds like a good idea. The disciples are thinking like leaders. And then Jesus all of a sudden turns to them and says, you give them something to eat. And like, there's thousands of people here. Just the powerlessness that they had to feel like, we can't get them food. We don't have money. You just told us not to carry a money bag. Like, what are you talking about, Jesus? And you can just, that's how I felt at times, is like, how am I going to raise this money? Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make these phone calls? Like, how are they going to think of me? And you just feel like incapable of doing what God has asked you to do. But what I love about that story is Jesus responds to them and says, how many loaves of bread do you have? They say, we don't know. So he says, go and see. And I love that they obey that command. They walk around and they say, do you have any bread? Do you have any bread? And they come back and they've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And what I love is that they don't just look at the 5 loaves and 2 fish and go, well, we don't have enough to feed everybody. I guess we shouldn't bring this to Jesus. No, they give it to Jesus, right? And what does he do with it? He multiplies it. And so the idea that I see there is, hey, you can't do it. You're not going to have the ability, the energy, the passion to do it. You don't have the resources to do it. You take what little you have, your faith, you say, Jesus, I got 5 loaves and 2 fish. will you multiply this? And he does. And so just I remember in that season just thinking about that story and what I was feeling and the reality that Jesus isn't asking me to really change the world. He's just asking me to bring what I have to him. And so I'm bringing these names, I'm bringing these phone calls, and I'm just asking him to multiply it and just watch him do the work.
I think a really simple truth I come back to is a verse that my husband and I read, or we say out loud to my son every night before bed, which has been such just a reminder for my husband and I of the simple truth that I think in support raising, we so have to lavish upon ourselves, remind ourselves. So it's Joshua 1:9, which is, why am I blanking now?
For I know that.
Thank you. I'm saying Atlas's name before. I'm okay. Joshua 1:9 is, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And there's so many things in that verse. He's commanding us, don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. But I think the end is one of my favorite parts, this idea that the Lord is with us wherever we go. As we're support raising, he's with you. He's walked before you and ordained your meetings, ordained who's going to be on your team, but he's also walking right alongside you. And as you go overseas, he is with you no matter where your feet walk. And there's something really simple about that as a believer. We know that. We know that the Lord is with us wherever we go, but to remember who God is, this kind of God that we serve, and he is walking with us in support raising every step of the way, every phone call, every meeting, every drive to the coffee shop before you get out of the car and meet with somebody. He is with us. And not only is he with us, he gives us the confidence enough to say, do not be frightened, do not be dismayed. So we can have confidence and boldness in support raising, and it's biblical. He's commanding us, don't be frightened, don't be dismayed, because I'm with you. It's nothing we can do in our own strength. It's no pep talk I can give to myself that would be good enough, but the Lord's saying, I'm commanding you to not fear because I'm promising you that I am with you. And I just think, wow, what a simple but beautiful truth that I have to remind myself of daily. But in support raising, what a beautiful picture that you're not walking in this journey alone. Every step you take is with the Lord, hand in hand, walking with you.
A really simple one for me is Psalm 40, verse 1, that says, you inclined your ear to me and heard my cry. And I think that encouraged me a lot at the point during fundraising when I would have fears or worries or doubts, to know that I could bring those to the Lord and he would hear my cry was super encouraging. And similar to what you're describing with Joshua, the people have reached the Red Sea and they're trembling and uncertain, full of fear and doubt. And for them to be told, you have no need to fear, you only need to be still and the Lord will fight for you. And so I think that encouraged me a lot in times when my work week during fundraising looked so different to what felt like work previously in life, and so to be able to rest in the Lord and know that it's him who's doing the work, and I can be still, I can live at peace even when my level of work looked different to my expectation or my picture of success. To know that the Lord was still working even in my rest was really helpful.
I'm thinking of it maybe in a more broader sense, in that Jesus has commanded us to go and make disciples, but who am I to listen to Jesus? Who is Jesus? That I would follow him, that I would be obedient to go overseas, that I would be willing to tithe my career. And the story that really reflects to me who Jesus is Peter's first encounter with Jesus after he's denied him, how Jesus embraces him and sits and have breakfast with him after Peter just done something he was adamant that he wouldn't do, yet he did it. And Jesus, and his compassionate love for us, embraces him and sits with him. And that's who Jesus is. He is a Savior worth following to the ends of the earth, because at the end of that Great Commission, like Abby said, he's promised that he is with us to the end of the age. And that's powerful, that you can go confidently. You can walk through this season of support raising knowing that God is with you every step of the way.
So one last question is there any encouraging stories you want to share from your own personal experience from support raising?
I have a really goofy one that's a little bit embarrassing, but I think we'll be vulnerable. So when I was support raising, phone calling was the hardest thing. And if you know me, I am not usually one of little words, and I love people. Like, I don't often struggle to communicate. I just think it's something the Lord has put in me. Like, I just love meeting new people. I love working with people, but for some reason, the idea of making phone calls in support raising was like terrifying. So much so that I would like type someone's number and then not press the green button. Like, I would sit there for minutes and like pray, but not feel anything, and pray some more. And there were so many times I would type a number and be sitting there at my kitchen table, and my husband would come alongside and press the green button, and I would like panic, like, no, you press it, now I have to talk to that person, I'm not ready. And I like needed the support of somebody to come and press the button, but also so weird. I guess I'm motivated by food. So phone calls were hard for me. So I would put like my favorite snack by the phone. And if I made 5 phone calls, whether they answer the phone or not, I would allow myself to have like 1 dark chocolate covered almond, and then I'd make 5 more phone calls. Okay, 1 more. So like, I didn't have the support of somebody there with me. I like had to almost play these mind games to get the job done, which I know sounds really weird. But to be honest, like, as a coach, I've been coaching for 8 years. There was so much fear in phone calling. Like, and I could feel this like overwhelming sense of fear that, to be honest, I hadn't really felt in my life before, especially in what it was regards to. So just know, if like phone calling feels scary for you, the idea of it, or the practical application, you are not alone. And there's so many things you can do. People supporting you, snacks if that works, post-it notes by your phone. And I think it's a really goofy story, but also just really real, to say like, there are parts of support raising that may be overwhelming and may be scary, but with the Lord and just with some encouragement and the people He's put around you, and maybe snacks, like, you will get through the hard parts and look back and just see how beautiful the Lord was to put people in your life to teach you how do you do something that feels really hard. Because now, as I look back, things that feel challenging and hard in my life, I reflect back on those phone calling days, the moments I sat at that table for hours agonizing a single phone call. And it has given me confidence to face fears that I have now that have nothing to do with support raising. Maybe it's the Lord like urging me to talk to somebody that I come across. And so I like think back to how He was so sweet and faithful in those fears, and then that carries over into like what I fear now. I don't have to use chocolate covered almonds every time, but just remembering those days that seemed really hard have pushed me to do, I would say, harder things now, like 8 years later.
I think about the people that just really caught me off guard, people that weren't even on my radar. For the time that we lived, or that I served in 2 years with GoCorps, and then the 5 years I served overseas after GoCorps, there was a man on our team who, to this day, I only ever spoke on the phone with. I have no idea what he looks like. I only know his name. And he was a connection through my dad, and he faithfully gave every single month. Like, that just blows me away that God would put that person in my life. Or the season that I was in before we got married and went overseas together, I was working at my dad's restaurant as a server. And because my life was heading towards overseas work, I talked about it a lot with my customers. And I had 2 customers in that 9-month period join our team, complete strangers to me, but they were excited about what we were doing and jumped on board. But I also think about the people that really sacrificed. We had a woman on our team who, if she had a gym membership, her health insurance gave her a credit, and so she committed to joining a gym and working out so that she would get that credit, and she gave that credit to us, and that is how she supported us. And she was very intentional to tell us that anytime she's at the gym or on the treadmill, she's praying for us as she's doing that. And I think it was those little stories like that just really meant the world to us.
One of my favorite support partnerships is, it was probably one of the very first phone calls and meetings that I set up when I began support raising as a 23-year-old right out of college. And I had set up the appointment, and driving to their house was praying and just asking the Lord, how much do I ask? What does that financial invitation look like? And I remember coming home from the appointment afterwards, having sat down with like an older couple that was my parents' age and their college-age son. Like, it was a whole family sort of time together. And I came home after, and she and my mom are good friends, so they're texting and debriefing. And my mom comes to me appalled, like, I can't believe you asked them for this specific amount. Like, do you know the financial situation they're in, all of this? And I was all of a sudden, like, Lord. and so it set me down this path of questioning, like, was that right? Did I hear you right, Lord? What should I do now? And following up with them afterwards, a week had gone by, I'd given them time to pray, and I called to ask, how are you feeling led? How has your week been since we met? And they said, we aren't able to give the amount that you asked for. We can give this amount, but our son, who's in college, wants to cover the rest to make up the total of what you invited us to consider. And it was the coolest thing, like, to just see God work through that conversation, that opportunity, that meeting, and to overcome those fears and doubts I started to feel, and the expectations that my parents were bringing in as well, and just all of that. It just remains a favorite for me. And to see that their college-age son, who's now not in college and is living his own life and job, he and his parents continue to faithfully give, and just how sweet that has been to remain connected with one another in that kind of partnership.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for inviting us into a lot of your stories and your wisdom and the ways that the Lord has used fundraising in your own life. And I just want to thank you guys for watching. If you have any other questions, we would absolutely love to just have a personal conversation with you. We have so many resources, and our job is to walk alongside you in this process. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll give a link that you can fill out to hear more from one of us coaches, because we want to answer your personal questions. So thanks so much, guys. And thank you guys for sharing.